My dad raised his glass and smiled like he was delivering a speech he'd practiced his whole life and said, "This is our successful child." The room laughed softly, approving, glasses lifted, eyes turned toward my brother standing beside his fiancée, proud, polished, exactly who they had always invested in, and I stood 3 steps behind them, invisible again. I felt it before I saw it, her eyes. His fiancée. She froze. Just for a second. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her champagne glass, and then she looked straight at me. Not confused. Not curious. Recognizing. That kind of recognition that doesn't come from introductions or polite small talk, but from memory, from something shared, something she thought would never follow her into this room. My chest went still, because I knew exactly where she had seen me before. 6 months earlier, she had been sitting across from me in a quiet exam room, asking me a question that could destroy everything standing in front of us right now. And my father kept talking. "We're so proud of the man he's become," he said, voice warm, certain, final. He had no idea, none of them did, that the woman his son was about to marry had once trusted me with something she hadn't even told him. Pause. Before I go on, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with this story, and drop a comment. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 31 years old, and for most of my life, I was not the child worth investing in. I learned that early, not through one big moment, but through 1,000 small, precise decisions that all pointed in the same direction. When I was 16, my brother got a brand new car. Red. Leather seats. My parents said it was because he needed something reliable for his future. I got his old laptop, the one that overheated after 20 minutes and had a cracked hinge taped together. When he got into a private university, they hosted a dinner. 20 guests. Catered food. A cake that said future doctor. When I got accepted into a state school, my mom hugged me in the kitchen and said, "That's practical." Practical. That word followed me everywhere. When tuition came up, my parents sat me down like it was a business meeting. My dad folded his hands and said it plainly, like he was stating a fact, not making a choice. "We're putting our resources into your brother's medical school. It's a better return." I remember nodding, not arguing, because arguing never changed anything, it only made things worse. Then he added, almost as an afterthought, "Girls don't need degrees like that anyway. You just need stability. A good husband." Pause. I didn't cry. Not in front of them. I just said okay and went to my room and opened my laptop that barely worked and started searching. Scholarships. Grants. Anything. Because if I accepted what they believed about me, then that would become true. And I refused to let that happen. So, I built something else. Quietly. I worked 3 jobs. Morning shift at a coffee shop that opened at 5 a.m. Afternoon classes. Night shift as a hospital clerk filing patient records until 11 p.m. Sometimes later. I learned how to function on 4 hours of sleep. Sometimes less. I ate whatever I could afford. I stopped going out, stopped explaining myself, stopped asking for permission. And something changed in me during those years, something my parents never saw because they were too busy watching my brother succeed. I got good at patterns, not just studying but understanding, seeing connections in things other people skimmed over, especially in the hospital. Medical records, lab results, case histories. I could look at a file and see the story underneath it, the part no one wrote down directly. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't behind. I was ahead. By the time I graduated summa cum laude, I had built everything myself. No family money, no safety net, just systems, discipline, and a refusal to disappear. They didn't come to the ceremony. They said my brother had something important that day. Of course he did. He always did. I stood there in a borrowed gown surrounded by families cheering, cameras flashing, and when they called my name, the applause was polite, distant, not mine. Pause, but I didn't stop, because I wasn't doing it for them anymore. I moved forward, into medicine, into a world where results mattered more than opinions, where what you knew and how you used it actually meant something. And that's where I met her, Olivia Hayes. She came in on a Tuesday afternoon. quiet,
composed.
the kind of person who looks like she has everything under control until you ask the right question. And then everything shifts. I remember the exact moment. The way her voice hesitated. The way her eyes flicked away. The gap between what she said and what her record suggested. That gap, that's where the truth lives. And I saw it immediately. She didn't know that I did. Not at first. But eventually she realized. And when she did, she leaned forward, lowered her voice, and asked me something that stayed with me long after she left that room. A question that had nothing to do with treatment and everything to do with consequences. Pause, and now 6 months later. I was standing in a room filled with people celebrating a future built on assumptions while holding a piece of the truth that could change everything. My father was still talking. My brother was smiling. And Olivia, she hadn't taken her eyes off me. Not for a second. Because she knew. And deep down so did I. This night wasn't going to end the way they thought it would. Not this time. I learned to measure love in numbers. Because numbers did not lie. They could be denied, explained away, softened with words, but they did not change. When my brother turned 18, my parents wrote his first tuition check. $42,000 for his first year of undergrad. I remember the envelope.
Thick.
Cream-colored. My mother held it like it meant something important, like it was a future being handed over. When I asked what the plan was for me, my father did not even look up from his phone. "We'll see what makes sense," he said. That was the phrase. What makes sense? Pause. What made sense, apparently, was continuing to invest in him. His expenses were never questioned. Housing near campus.
Covered.
Meal plans.
Covered.
A summer program in Boston that cost $8,000.
Covered.
A private tutor for organic chemistry at $400 an hour when his grades dipped slightly. Covered, without hesitation. I know the numbers because I tracked them. Not because I was bitter, but because I needed to understand the system I was living in. If I could see it clearly, maybe I could find a way around it. By the time he got accepted into medical school, the number had grown to $180,000. Tuition.
Fees.
Living expenses.
Paid.
Fully.
No loans.
No conditions. Just belief. Pause. I remember the dinner they threw the night his acceptance letter came in. 24 guests. A private room at a steakhouse downtown. My father stood at the head of the table, proud, loud, completely certain. "This is what commitment looks like," he said, gesturing toward my brother. "This is what happens when you invest wisely." People nodded. They always nodded. Because confidence sounds like truth when you hear it enough. I sat at the far end of the table. Not even at the main grouping. I counted the place settings. 24 plates. 23 people who mattered.
And me.
When someone asked what I was studying, my mother answered for me. "Something practical," she said, smiling in that polite way that shuts down further questions. Something practical. Pause, that was how they minimized it. Not wrong. Not bad. Just smaller. Easier to ignore. Easier to justify not investing in. When my tuition bill came in that same year, I printed it out and left it on the kitchen counter.
$26,000.
I stood there while my parents looked at it. My father glanced over it for maybe 3 seconds before sliding it back toward me. "We already discussed this," he said. "You are capable of figuring it out." Capable. That word sounds like encouragement until you realize it is just another way of saying you are on your own. I nodded. Again. Always nodding. Because arguing would not change the outcome. It never had. That night, I sat on the floor of my room with a calculator and a notebook. I wrote everything down. Tuition.
Rent. Food.
Transportation. Minimum payments. I added it up 3 times just to make sure I was not making a mistake. The number was impossible. On paper, it did not work. But I had already decided something. I was not going to ask again. Not for money. Not for approval. Not for permission to take up space in a family that had already decided my value. Pause, so I built a different system. One that did not rely on them at all. I picked up extra shifts at the coffee shop. 5 in the morning until 9. Then classes. Then the hospital. Filing, organizing, running charts between departments. I learned how hospitals breathe. The rhythm of it. The way information moves. The way small details get missed when people are tired, rushed, distracted. And I paid attention. Always. Because attention was the only advantage I had. While my brother was studying in quiet libraries with private tutors, I was memorizing material between customers, between tasks, between moments where I could steal 30 seconds to review something before the next demand pulled me away. It was not efficient. It was not ideal. But it was mine. Every hour I worked, every grade I earned, every exam I passed, I knew exactly what it had cost me. And that changed the way I moved through the world. Pause. The gap between us kept growing. Not just financially, but in how we were seen. When he came home, my parents asked about his classes, his professors, his future specialization. They leaned in when he spoke. They listened. When I came home, they asked if I was managing okay. Not what I was learning. Not what I was building. Just managing. Like survival was the highest expectation they had for me. I stopped correcting them. Because correcting people who have already decided who you are is a losing game. Instead, I let them believe it. I let them think I was behind. Less capable. Less important. Because while they were watching him, they were not watching me. And that gave me something I had never had before.
Space.
Pause. Space to become something they did not anticipate. Space to develop skills they did not understand. Space to operate without their expectations, shaping every move I made. By the time I reached my final year, I was not just keeping up. I was ahead. Top of my class. Faculty recommendations. Research recognition. The kind of achievements that should have changed the way they saw me. But they did not. Because the narrative had already been written. And people rarely rewrite a story that benefits them. So, I stopped trying to be seen by them. I focused on being undeniable somewhere else. Somewhere that actually measured results. Pause. And that is how I ended up in that exam room, months before the engagement party, sitting across from a woman who had no idea that her life was about to intersect with mine in a way neither of us could control. At the time, she was just another patient, another case, another file in a system I had learned to read better than most. But there was something off. Not obvious. Not dramatic. Just misaligned. The kind of misalignment you only notice if you have spent years training yourself to see what is not fit. And I had. Because when you grow up in a system that does not make sense, you either accept it or you learn to decode it. I chose the second. And what I saw in her file, in her hesitation, in the things she said, and the things she avoided saying, it did not match. Not cleanly. Not safely. And I remember thinking, just for a moment, this matters. More than she realizes. More than anyone realizes. I just did not know yet how much it was going to matter to me. I did not confront her right away. That is not how you handle something that does not quite add up. You do not rush in. You do not accuse. You observe. You ask the right questions, and then you listen to what is not being said. Olivia sat across from me with her hands folded neatly in her lap, posture perfect, voice controlled. The kind of control that looks natural until you notice how carefully it is being maintained. I asked routine questions first. Basic history. Current symptoms. Family background. She answered everything correctly. Almost too correctly. No hesitation where there should have been some.
No uncertainty.
Just clean, polished responses that fit together a little too well. And that was the problem. Real medical histories are not perfect. They have gaps. Contradictions. Small inconsistencies that show you where to look closer. Hers did not. Which meant one of two things. Either she was unusually precise, or she was choosing what to show me. Pause. I turned to her chart. Lab results. Prior visits. Notes from other providers. Everything looked standard at first glance. But I had spent years training myself to read differently. Not line by line, but pattern by pattern. And the pattern here was incomplete. There were references to prior consultations that were not fully documented. Mentions of follow-ups that had no recorded outcomes. Dates that aligned but did not connect. Like pieces of a puzzle placed next to each other, but never locked in.
I
felt it then. That quiet shift in my chest. The same feeling I used to get when something in my own life did not make sense, but I did not yet have the proof to explain why. I looked back at her. She was watching me now. Not openly. Not directly, but enough. Enough to know she was aware of what I was seeing. Pause. Have you ever been treated for this before? I asked. Simple. Neutral.
No accusation.
Her answer came quickly. No, too quickly. Then a small pause. Almost invisible. Nothing significant. There it was. Not a lie, not exactly. But not the truth either. Something adjusted.
Slightly.
I did not push.
Not yet.
Because pushing too early closes doors. And I needed that door to stay open. So I shifted. Asked about lifestyle. Work. Stress levels. Normal questions. But I watched how she responded. Where her voice tightened. Where it softened. Where she avoided specifics. And slowly, the outline of something began to form. Not clear. Not complete. But enough to know this was not just a routine case. Pause. Toward the end of the visit, I leaned back slightly and gave her space. That is another thing I learned. People fill silence when they are holding something in. You just have to let the silence exist long enough. A few seconds passed. Then 5. Then 10. And finally she spoke again. Not answering a question. Not continuing the conversation. Just adding something. If there was something important, something from before, would it stay confidential?
Her voice was lower now.
Careful. Measured. That was the moment everything shifted. Because that was not a medical question. That was a risk calculation. Pause. I answered the way I always do.
Clearly.
Directly. Your information is protected. But anything that affects your care, I need to understand fully. No pressure.
No judgment.
Just the truth. She nodded slowly, looked down at her hands. And for a second the control slipped. Just a little. Enough for me to see the tension underneath it. Enough to confirm what I already suspected. There was something she had not disclosed. Something she believed could change how she was seen or how someone else would see her. Pause. She did not tell me everything that day. Not completely. But she told me enough. Enough to understand the direction of the problem. Enough to know that whatever she was holding back, it was not minor. And more importantly, it was not isolated to her. It involved someone else. Someone whose name I had not yet connected, but would. I documented everything carefully. Every statement she made. Every clarification. Every moment where she chose her words instead of letting them come naturally. Because in medicine, what is said matters. But how it is said sometimes matters more. Pause. After she left, I sat there for a few minutes longer than usual, reviewing the chart again, cross-checking the timeline, looking for anything I might have missed. And then I saw it. Not obvious. Not highlighted. Just a small detail buried in the intake form. Emergency contact.
Name.
Number. Relationship. I read it once. Then again. My brain recognized it before I allowed myself to fully process it. Daniel Brooks. Pause, my brother. For a second, everything went quiet. Not the room. Not the hospital.
Just inside me.
Because suddenly this was not just a case. Not just a pattern that needed to be solved. This was connected. Directly. To the one person my entire family had built their future around. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. The same question repeating in my mind. Is this a coincidence? It could have been. Common name. Common city. But something in me already knew. Because patterns do not just exist in medical charts. They exist in people. In choices. In the way lives intersect at the exact moment they are supposed to. Pause. I did not call him. I did not say anything to my parents. I did not even confirm it immediately. Because once you pull on a thread like that, you cannot put it back. And I needed to be certain. Completely certain. So I did what I had always done. I gathered information. Quietly.
Carefully.
Without drawing attention. I verified the number. The address. The details that would either confirm or deny what I was starting to suspect. And piece by piece, it aligned. Not loosely. Not maybe.
Exactly.
Pause. Olivia Hayes was not just my patient. She was my brother's fiancée. And she had come to me without knowing who I was, carrying information that could change the entire foundation of their relationship. I sat there, staring at the screen, feeling something settle deep in my chest. Not panic. Not anger. Something else. Something quieter.
Heavier.
Because for the first time in my life, I was holding something that mattered in their world. Something that could not be dismissed. Not minimized. Not ignored. And the question was no longer whether I would see it through. The question was what I was going to do with it. I did not sleep much that night. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because my mind would not stop running through the same question from every possible angle. Not as a daughter. Not as a sister. But as a doctor. Because that was the only role that mattered in that moment. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, her file on the screen, the soft glow reflecting off a half-empty cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago. I read everything again. Every note. Every timestamp. Every word she had chosen, and every word she had avoided. There is a difference between not knowing something and choosing not to say it. And Olivia, she knew. That much was clear. Pause, but knowing something and understanding the consequences of it, those are not the same. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, trying to separate the two parts of myself that were starting to blur together. Natalie the doctor, and Natalie the daughter. Because Natalie the daughter wanted to call him. Wanted to ask a simple question. Do you know? Just that. Nothing more. But Natalie the doctor, she knew better. Because the moment I stepped outside that boundary, everything would become compromised. Not just the case. Not just my career. But the truth itself. And the truth only has value when it is handled correctly. Pause. The next morning, I went into the hospital earlier than usual. Not because I had to, but because I needed clarity. And there was only one place I trusted to get it. Dr. Helen Carter's office was at the end of the hallway, quiet, tucked away from the noise of the main floor. She had been in medicine longer than I had been alive. The kind of presence that did not need to raise her voice to command attention. When I knocked, she looked up immediately, like she already knew I was coming. You look like you have not slept, she said. Not a question. A statement.
I
stepped inside and closed the door behind me. I need your perspective on something, I said. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. Then sit down and tell me only what matters. Pause, that was her rule. No drama. No unnecessary details. Just the facts. So I gave them to her.
Carefully.
Professionally. I did not mention my brother at first. I did not make it personal. I laid out the inconsistencies.
The gaps.
The statements the patient had made. The information that had been withheld. She listened without interrupting. Not once. Just watching me with that steady, evaluating gaze that made it impossible to hide behind uncertainty. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and folded her hands. And, what do you think is happening? She asked. I did not hesitate. She is managing information, I said. Selective disclosure. Enough to receive care, not enough to reveal the full picture. Dr. Carter nodded once. And why? There it was. The question underneath everything else. I took a breath. Because the full picture would change something outside of this room. Pause. Her eyes held mine for a moment longer than usual. Then she said, very quietly, and now it has changed something inside this room. I nodded. Because that was the part one could not undo. She let the silence sit for a few seconds before speaking again. You have two responsibilities here, she said. Your patient and your profession. Everything else is noise.
Noise.
That word landed heavier than I expected. Because everything else, my family, my history, the years of being overlooked, all of it suddenly felt like something separate. Something I was not allowed to bring into this decision. Pause. What if it is not just noise? I asked before I could stop myself. It was the first time I had stepped outside the clinical line since I sat down. She noticed. Of course she did. She always did. Then you are asking the wrong question, she replied.
Calm.
Certain. The question is not how this affects you. The question is what your role requires you to do. I exhaled slowly, feeling something settle into place. Not comfort. Not relief. But clarity. Because she was right.
She was always right about this.
Emotion complicates. Responsibility simplifies. Pause. I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed copy of the intake form. I slid it across the desk, turning it so she could see the name. Emergency contact. Daniel Brooks. I watched her eyes move across the page. Watched the exact moment recognition clicked. Not surprise. Not shock. Just understanding.
She looked up at me.
And for the first time since I had walked in, there was something different in her expression. Not concern. Not hesitation. Something closer to respect. Now I understand why you are here, she said. Pause. The room felt smaller after that. Not physically, but in the way everything had narrowed down to a single point. This was no longer abstract. No longer hypothetical. This was real.
Direct.
Personal. Does he know? She asked. I shook my head. I do not think so. She considered that for a moment, then asked the only question that mattered. And how do you know that? I hesitated, just for a second, because the truth was, I did not. Not completely, but I understood people, patterns, behavior, and everything I knew about my brother told me if he knew something that's significant it would show. In the way he spoke, the way he carried himself, the way he was being presented to the world.
And none of that had changed.
Pause, because nothing about him suggests he is making a fully informed decision, I said finally. Dr. Carter nodded slowly. Then she leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering just enough to make the next words land exactly where they needed to. Then your job is not to protect him, she said. And it is not to expose her. Your job is to maintain integrity within your role. Nothing more. Nothing less. Pause, it sounded simple.
Clean. Contained.
But I knew it was not. Because integrity in a situation like this does not exist without consequence. And for the first time in my life, I was standing at the center of something where the outcome did not just affect me. It affected all of them. The family that had never chosen me, and the one person they had chosen above everyone else. I sat there for a moment longer, letting that reality settle in. Then I stood up. Thank you, I said. She nodded once. Do not thank me yet, she replied. You have not made your decision.
Pause, she was right.
I had not. Not completely. But as I walked out of her office and back into the noise of the hospital, I realized something had already shifted, because for the first time, I was not reacting to their choices. I was making my own, and whatever happened next was not going to be an accident. I did not rush the next step. That was the first rule I had learned the hard way. Anything done too quickly, especially when emotions are involved, almost always leads to mistakes. And this was not something I could afford to get wrong. So I created distance. Not physical distance, that was impossible, but mental distance. I treated Olivia like any other patient. I followed protocol. I scheduled a follow-up. I documented everything. I did not mention my brother. I did not hint at recognition. I stayed exactly where I was supposed to be. And that was harder than I expected. Pause, because every time she sat across from me, I saw both versions of her at the same time. The patient and the woman standing beside my brother at that engagement party. And those two versions did not align. Not fully. Not honestly. At the follow-up appointment, she seemed more guarded. More aware. Like she had replayed our last conversation in her mind and realized she had said more than she intended. I let her set the tone. That was important. If she felt pressured, she would shut down. And I needed her to stay open, even if only slightly. Have you thought about what we discussed? I asked. Simple. Neutral. She nodded, but her eyes did not meet mine. I have, she said. I do not think it changes anything. That answer told me everything. Not because of what it said, but because of what it avoided. It was not about whether it changed something medically. It was about whether it changed something personally. And she was choosing not to go there. Pause. I did not challenge her directly. Instead, I shifted the conversation back to care. Options. Monitoring. Risk management. All the things that were within my role. But I was listening. Carefully. Because people reveal more when they think the conversation has moved on. And eventually she did. Not in a dramatic way. Not in a confession. Just a small sentence, almost an afterthought. Some things are better handled later, she said quietly. I looked at her. Really looked this time. And I realized something I had not fully considered before. She was not just hiding something. She was delaying it, which meant she had already decided that whatever the truth was, it could wait until after a certain point. Pause. After the wedding. The realization landed slowly, but once it did not leave. Because that changed the entire structure of the situation. This was not uncertainty. This was timing. Strategic timing. And that meant the person she was protecting was not herself. It was the version of the future she wanted to secure first. I documented the visit. Every word. Every phrasing choice. Not because I was building a case, but because accuracy matters. Especially when things become complicated. And this was becoming very complicated. Pause. A few days later, I received the invitation. Thick cardstock. Embossed lettering. Formal.
Polished.
My brother's engagement party. The date, the time, the venue. Everything about it was exactly what I expected. Carefully curated. Designed to present a specific image. I turned the card over in my hands, reading it again, even though I already knew what it said. And for a moment, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because of the contrast. They had never shown up for my milestones. Not once. Not my graduation. Not my achievements. Not the things I had built from nothing. But here, I was being invited. Not as someone they were proud of, but as someone who could quietly stand in the background and complete the picture. Pause. I set the invitation down on the table and stared at it for a long time. Because this was the moment where everything started to converge. My past. My profession. My family. All of it leading to one place. One event. One room. And the question was no longer abstract. It was immediate.
Real.
If I went, I would be walking into a situation where I held information that could change everything. If I did not go, I would be choosing distance over responsibility. Pause. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found his name. Daniel. My brother. The one they had built everything around. The one they had believed in without hesitation. My thumb hovered over the call button for a few seconds. Then 10. Then longer. Because this was the simplest option. Call him.
Ask. Clarify.
End the uncertainty. But simplicity does not always mean it is the right choice. Because once I crossed that line, I would no longer be acting within my role. I would be stepping into something else. Something personal. And personal is where things fall apart. Pause. So I did not call. Instead, I did what I had trained myself to do. I prepared. Not emotionally, but structurally. I reviewed the guidelines. Confidentiality boundaries. What could be said? What could not? What was mine to carry and what was not? Because if this situation moved into a public space, and I had a feeling it would, I needed to be absolutely clear on where I stood. Not as a sister, but as a professional. Pause. The day of the engagement party arrived faster than I expected. I stood in front of my closet for longer than necessary, not because I did not know what to wear, but because I understood what this moment represented. This was not just an event. It was a stage. And I had spent my entire life being placed at the edge of it. Barely visible. Barely acknowledged. But this time something was different. Not because they had changed. They had not. But because I had. Pause. I chose something simple.
Clean.
Professional. Not designed to stand out, but not designed to disappear either. Then I picked up the invitation one last time before leaving. Ran my fingers over the embossed lettering. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was stepping into their world. I felt like I was stepping into a moment that belonged, at least partially, to me. Pause. Because whether they realized it or not, the outcome of this night was no longer entirely in their control. I arrived 10 minutes early. Not because I wanted to make an entrance, but because I needed a moment to understand the room before stepping into it. The venue was exactly what I expected. High ceilings. Soft lighting. Everything polished to the point where nothing felt accidental. Conversations flowed easily. Laughter in controlled bursts. People who knew how to exist in spaces like this because they had always belonged in them. I stood just outside the main area for a few seconds, watching, observing, the same way I did in the hospital. Patterns first. Then movement. Then people. My parents were. Near the center, of course. My father moving from group to group, shaking hands, reinforcing his presence like he always did. My mother close behind, smiling at the right moments, saying just enough to maintain the image. And my brother standing exactly where he was meant to be. Confident. Relaxed. The version of success they had spent years building.
Pause. Then I saw her.
Olivia. She was speaking to a small group, posture perfect, expression composed. But I recognized the tension immediately. Not visible to anyone else. But I had seen it before. In that exam room. In the slight delay before she answered certain questions. In the way her fingers pressed together when she was holding something back. And now here she was. Smiling.
Nodding.
Playing a role that required everything to stay exactly as it appeared. For a moment, I considered leaving. Not out of fear, but because I understood what this situation had become. This was no longer just about information. It was about timing, about control, about who got to decide when the truth became visible. Pause, but I stayed. Because leaving would have been the same as every other time in my life when I stepped back, made myself smaller, allowed their version of events to continue without interruption. And I was done doing that. So I walked in.
Slowly.
Not drawing attention, but not avoiding it either. A few people glanced at me as I passed. Some recognized me vaguely. Most did not. That was familiar. Comfortable, even. Being present, without being acknowledged. It had been my position for years. Pause. My mother saw me first. Her smile shifted slightly. Not disappearing, but adjusting. Natalie, she said, like she was surprised, even though she had sent the invitation herself. You made it. I nodded. I was invited. I replied.
Calm.
Neutral. No edge. She hesitated for just a second before leaning in for a brief, controlled hug. Of course, she said. We are glad you are here. The words sounded right, but they did not land. They never did. Pause. My father joined a moment later. His presence filled the space immediately. There she is, he said, placing a hand on my shoulder in a gesture that looked familiar, but felt distant. Busy as always, I assume? I met his gaze. I work, I said simply. He smiled, but it did not reach his
eyes.
That is good, he replied. Staying productive. Productive. Not accomplished. Not successful. Just productive. I nodded again, because correcting him was not the point. Not yet. Pause. My brother approached then, pulling me into a quick, easy hug. Hey, he said. Glad you came. His tone was genuine. That was the complicated part. He was not cruel. Not intentionally. He had just grown up in a system where everything had been arranged for him, and he had never needed to question it. Congratulations, I said. He smiled. Thanks. You will meet Olivia in a second. She is amazing. I held his gaze for a fraction longer than necessary. I know, I said. He laughed lightly, assuming I meant it in the way he expected. But I was not talking about what he thought I was. Pause, and then she was there. Standing beside him. Close enough that I could see the exact moment recognition hit again. Not surprise this time. Not confusion. Just confirmation. Her eyes locked onto mine, and for a second, everything else in the room faded. Not the sound. Not the people. Just the meaning behind it. Because we both knew this was no longer contained. No longer private. Natalie, my brother said, unaware of everything happening in that space between us. This is Olivia. A small pause. Then Olivia extended her hand. Controlled.
Steady.
It is nice to meet you, she said. The words were perfect. The tone was perfect. But her eyes, they were asking a question she could not say out loud. Do you know? And more importantly, what are you going to do? Pause, I took her hand. We have met before, I said quietly. Not loud enough for anyone else to catch the weight of it. Just enough for her. Her fingers tightened slightly in mine. There it was. The shift. The moment where the controlled version of reality began to crack, just enough to let something real through. My brother looked between us, confused but not concerned. Oh, really? He said. Small world. Small world. Pause, if only he knew how small it had just become. I released her hand slowly. Yes, I said. Something like that. The conversation moved on, as it always does. People joined. Drinks were passed around. Laughter filled the gaps where tension tried to settle. But underneath it something had changed. Not visibly, not dramatically, but enough. Enough that every glance between us carried meaning. Every pause held weight. Every moment felt like it was building toward something that had not yet been said. Pause. And as I stood there, listening to conversations that had nothing to do with me, watching a celebration built on a version of the truth that was incomplete, I realized something with absolute clarity. This night was not just a gathering. It was a countdown. Not to a specific moment. Not to a planned reveal. But to the point where silence was no longer an option. I moved away from the center of the room, without making it obvious. Not because I wanted distance from them, but because I needed space to think clearly. The noise of the party continued around me. Glasses clinking, conversations overlapping, laughter rising and falling in controlled waves. From the outside, nothing had changed. Everything looked exactly as it was supposed to. But inside me something was shifting. Slowly, quietly, irreversibly. Pause. I stood near the edge of the room, watching them. My brother with his hand resting lightly on Olivia's back, guiding her through conversations like this was second nature. My parents moving in and out of groups, reinforcing the narrative they had built over decades. And Olivia adapting,
Smiling.
responding, playing her role perfectly. But I could see the difference now. Because once you know what someone is holding back, you cannot unsee it. Every pause becomes louder. Every glance becomes sharper. Every carefully chosen word carries weight. Pause, and the question kept returning. Not loudly. Not urgently. Just consistently. What are you going to do? I closed my eyes for a moment, just long enough to separate the noise from the decision in front of me. Because this was not about timing anymore. It was about responsibility. If I stayed silent, nothing would change. The engagement would move forward. The wedding would happen. And whatever truth Olivia was delaying would surface later. On her terms. At a time when the consequences would be deeper. More complicated. Harder to undo. But if I spoke even carefully, even within the boundaries I had set, it would disrupt everything. Not just for her. For him. For my family. For the image they had spent years constructing. Pause. I opened my eyes and looked across the room again. My father was laughing now, hand raised slightly, as he emphasized a point to a group of guests. The same posture, the same tone, the same certainty. I had seen it my entire life. That belief that he controlled the narrative, that he decided what was true simply by saying it with enough confidence. And for years he had been right, because no one had challenged it. No one had stood in a position where they could. Pause until now. A memory surfaced then. Not from tonight. Not from the hospital. From years ago. I was 17, standing in the kitchen while my parents discussed my future like it was already decided. She will be fine, my father had said. She is not built for anything high pressure. She just needs stability. I remember the way I stood there. Silent. Still. Letting the words settle into something that would follow me for years. Not because they were true, but because they were repeated often enough that they became accepted. Pause, and now here I was, standing in a room where that same narrative still existed. Just updated, refined. My brother, the success. Me, the background, the support. The one who showed up quietly and left without impact. But that version of me did not exist anymore. Not in this space. Not in this moment. Pause, I felt it then. Not anger. Not even frustration. Something clearer.
Sharper.
A line forming between what I had been and what I was now. And on one side of that line was silence. On the other was something else entirely. Pause. I glanced back toward Olivia. She was watching me again. Not constantly. Not obviously. But enough. Enough to know she understood that the situation had shifted. That the control she thought she had over the timing was no longer entirely hers. And in her eyes, I saw something new. Not just tension. Not just awareness. Fear. Not dramatic. Not overwhelming. But present.
Real.
Because she knew what I knew. And more importantly, she knew that I knew. Pause. I took a slow breath and exhaled, grounding myself in the only thing that mattered. My role. Not as a sister. Not as a daughter. But as a doctor. Because everything else, all the history, all the imbalance, all the years of being overlooked, none of that could dictate what I did next. If I let it, then this would become personal. And once something becomes personal, it loses structure. It loses integrity. Pause, but that did not mean doing nothing. Doing nothing was still a choice. And in this case, it was a choice with consequences. I stepped away from the wall and moved toward a quieter area near the back of the room. Not hidden, but less crowded. Then I waited. Not long. Just enough. Because I knew she would come to me. People in her position always do. When the gap between what is known and what is hidden becomes too wide, they look for a way to manage it, to control it, to contain it. And within a minute, she did. Pause. Can we talk? Olivia's voice was low, controlled, but there was a tightness there now that had not been present earlier. I nodded once and gestured toward the hallway just outside the main room. Neutral ground. Visible, but private enough for a conversation that mattered. We stepped out together. The noise of the party softened behind us, replaced by a quieter, more contained space. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Because we both understood, this was not a casual conversation. Pause. She turned to face me fully, her composure still intact but thinner now. You knew, she said. Not a question. A statement. I met her gaze. I confirmed it, I replied. Accurate. Measured. Nothing more. Her jaw tightened slightly. And you did not say anything. Another statement. I held the silence for a second before answering. It was not my place to say anything outside of my role. Pause. She looked at me, then really looked, as if trying to determine whether I was a threat or something else entirely. And what is your role exactly? She asked. There it was. The question behind everything. I did not answer immediately. Not because I did not know, but because I wanted her to understand the weight of it before I said it. To ensure that decisions are made with accurate information, I said finally.
Calm. Direct.
No room for misinterpretation. Pause. The silence that followed was different. Heavier. Because now it was clear. Not just what I knew, but what I might do with it. And for the first time since this began, the control she had been holding on to started to slip. She did not respond immediately. Not because she did not understand what I meant, but because she was recalculating. I could see it in the way her eyes shifted slightly, in the way her posture adjusted just enough to signal that the conversation had moved into territory she could not control the same way anymore. Accurate information, she repeated quietly, almost to herself. Then she looked back at me, more directly this time. You mean information that could change things? I held her gaze. Information that should have been considered already, I said.
No accusation. No emotion.
Just the truth. Pause. She exhaled slowly, her composure tightening again, like she was pulling something back into place. I was going to tell him, she said. There it was. The explanation. The justification. The version of the story she needed me to accept. When? I asked. Not sharply. Not aggressively. Just precisely. Because timing mattered. More than anything else in this situation. She hesitated. Not long. But long enough. After the wedding, she said finally. The words settled between us. Heavy. Final. Exactly what I had already suspected. Pause, I nodded once. Not because I agreed, but because I understood. So, he makes a lifelong commitment without all the information, I said. She flinched slightly at that. Not visibly enough for anyone else to notice, but I noticed. It is not that simple, she replied, her voice lower now, more defensive. There are things that are manageable, things that do not define everything. I listened. I always listened, because people reveal their priorities when they explain themselves. And who decides what matters enough to share? I asked. Pause. She did not answer right away, because there was no clean answer to that question. not one that did not expose the imbalance in what she was doing. Finally, she looked away for a second before saying, "I am not trying to hurt him." I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, very calmly, "Intent does not change outcome." Pause. The silence that followed was different now. Not uncertain, not searching, just real. Because we had both moved past the surface of the situation. This was no longer about what was convenient or comfortable or even understandable. It was about responsibility. And responsibility does not bend to timing. Pause. She crossed her arms slightly, not in defense, but in containment. "So, what are you going to do?" she asked. There it was. The question she had been circling since the moment she saw me in that room. I did not answer immediately, because this was the moment where everything could shift. Not dramatically, not loudly, but permanently. "I am not going to violate confidentiality," I said first. That mattered. It set the boundary. It defined the space I was operating within. I saw a flicker of relief pass through her expression. Small, brief, but there. Pause, then I continued. "But I am also not going to participate in a situation where someone is making a decision based on incomplete information if I am directly involved in that information." The relief disappeared.
Just like that.
Because now she understood. I was not going to expose her. But I was not going to protect the timing she had chosen either. Pause. "You cannot do that," she said quietly. Not angry. Not loud. Just firm. Like she was trying to reassert control. "You cannot insert yourself into this." I held her gaze, steady. "I already am in it," I replied. Pause, that landed. Because it was undeniable.
She had come to me.
She had shared information. She had created the connection. This was not something I had stepped into by choice. It was something that had already included me, whether either of us wanted it to or not. She looked at me for a long moment, searching for something. A weakness. A hesitation. A reason to believe I would step back. But there was nothing there. Not anymore. Pause. "If this comes out tonight," she began, her voice tightening slightly, "it will destroy everything." I considered that. Not emotionally. Structurally. Because she was not wrong. It would change everything. But destruction is not always the result of truth. Sometimes it is the result of building something on a version of reality that cannot hold. Or it will prevent something from being built on a false assumption, I said. Pause. Her expression shifted again. Not fear this time. Something closer to resignation. Because she understood what I was saying, even if she did not want to accept it. "You think you are doing the right thing," she said. I did not respond immediately. Because this was not about what I thought. It was about what the situation required. "I think I am doing my job," I said finally. Pause. That was the difference. And she knew it. We stood there in silence for a few seconds longer. The noise of the party drifting in from behind us, distant but constant. A reminder that everything was still moving forward, even as this moment slowed down. Then she straightened slightly, her composure returning but different now. Not as secure. Not as controlled. "He deserves to hear it from me," she said. There was something genuine in that. Something real. And for the first time in this conversation, I believed her. Not the timing.
Not the plan.
But the intention behind that sentence. Pause, I nodded once. "Then you should tell him," I said. Simple.
Direct.
No room for delay. Her eyes widened slightly. "Tonight?" she asked. I held her gaze. "Before he makes any decisions that depend on it." Pause. That was the moment everything crystallized. Because now, the responsibility had shifted. Not to me, back to her, where it had always belonged. And she knew it. She looked toward the doorway, toward the room where he was standing, laughing, completely unaware of what was about to change. Then she looked back at me. And for a second, the composure dropped completely. Just long enough for me to see the weight of the choice in front of her. Pause. "If I do this," she said quietly, "there is no going back." I met her gaze, steady. "There never was," I replied. Pause. And with that, the silence between us settled into something final. Because the decision was no longer theoretical. It was immediate, real, and whatever happened next was not going to stay contained within this hallway. I watched her for a moment longer after those words settled between us. Not because I needed to say anything else, but because I understood exactly what that kind of decision feels like. The moment when everything you have been holding together starts to separate, and you realize you are the one who has to choose which version of reality survives. Then she nodded.
Not to me.
To herself. A small, almost imperceptible movement, but it was enough. Pause. Okay, she said quietly.
Just that. No explanation.
No attempt to negotiate further. Just acceptance. And then she turned. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But with purpose. She walked back toward the main room, her posture steady, her expression already beginning to reset into something composed enough to pass under casual observation. But I could still
see it. The shift.
The weight she was carrying now was no longer hidden. It had direction. Pause. I stayed where I was for a few seconds after she left. Not following. Not interfering. Because this part was hers. It had to be. If I stepped in now, I would be taking something that did not belong to me, and that would change the nature of everything that followed. So I waited. Let the moment unfold without me forcing it. Pause. The noise of the party continued behind the door. Nothing had changed yet. Conversations, laughter, glasses, the same rhythm as before. But there is a difference between a room that feels stable and a room that is about to shift. And I could feel it now. Not visibly, not audibly, just underneath. Pause. After a minute, I stepped back inside.
Slowly.
Not looking for anything specific, but aware of everything. My eyes moved across the room, tracking movement, posture, energy. And then I saw them. Near the far side, slightly removed from the main cluster of guests. My brother and Olivia. Standing closer than before. Not in a relaxed, public way they had been earlier, but in a tighter, more contained space. Their conversation was quiet, focused.
No smiles.
No performance. Just direct. Pause. I did not move closer. I did not need to. The distance was enough. Because I was not there to hear every word. I was there to understand what was happening. And what was happening was exactly what needed to happen. He was listening. Really listening. Not nodding politely. Not waiting for his turn to speak. Just taking in what she was saying. And she was not holding back anymore. I could see it in the way her shoulders shifted, in the way her hands moved slightly as she spoke. This was not controlled. This was not curated. This was real. Pause. Time stretched in a strange way in that moment. It could have been 30 seconds. It could have been 5 minutes. I did not check. I did not need to. Because the outcome was already forming. I saw it first in his face. Not a dramatic reaction. Not anger. Not shock. Something quieter. Something deeper. The kind of realization that does not explode outward, but settles inward. And changes everything from the inside out. Pause. He stepped back slightly. Just enough to create space. Not distance but clarity. He said something I could not hear. Olivia responded immediately. Then there was a pause. Longer this time. And that was when I knew. Because silence after truth is never empty. It is where decisions are made. Pause. Around them, the party continued. Unaware. Uninterrupted.
People laughed.
Music played softly in the background. My father was still speaking to a group near the center, his voice carrying just enough to draw attention without demanding it. My mother smiled, nodded, maintained the image. Everything looked exactly the same. But it was not. Not anymore. Pause. I felt a presence beside me and turned slightly. One of the guests. Someone I recognized vaguely. Beautiful event, right? She said casually. I nodded. Very well put together, I replied. She smiled and moved on, the conversation already forgotten. That was the thing about rooms like this. People see what they expect to see. And until something forces them to look closer, they never question it. Pause. My attention returned to my brother. He was no longer standing in the same way. The ease was gone. Not replaced with tension but with something more grounded. More aware. He looked at Olivia again. Not with the same automatic confidence, but with intention. Like he was seeing her, not the version of her he had built in his mind, but the person in front of him. Fully. Pause, and then he nodded. Once.
Slow.
Deliberate. Not agreement. Not acceptance. Just acknowledgement. The kind that comes before a decision is spoken out loud. Olivia's shoulders dropped slightly. Not in relief, but in release. Because whatever came next was no longer being delayed. Pause. I exhaled quietly, realizing I had been holding my breath without noticing. Not out of anxiety, but because I understood the weight of what I was witnessing. This was not a dramatic confrontation. Not a public scene. It was something else entirely. A correction. A moment where the truth entered a space where it had not been allowed before. Pause. My brother turned slightly, his gaze scanning the room. For a second, it landed on me. And in that brief connection, I saw it. Recognition. Not of what I had done, but of something else. Something deeper. The understanding that I had been part of this, not by interfering, but by not stepping away. And for the first time there was no dismissal in his expression.
No assumption.
Just awareness. Pause. He looked away again, turning back to Olivia. The conversation between them continued, quieter now. More contained. But the direction had been set. Whatever decision he was going to make, it would not be based on incomplete information. And that was the only outcome that mattered. Pause. Across the room, my father raised his glass again, calling for attention. The crowd began to shift, to gather, to reorient toward the center.
The speech.
The moment he had been building toward all evening. I glanced back at my brother and Olivia one more time. They were still standing together. Not as they had been before, but not apart either. Something had changed. Not broken. Not resolved. But real. Pause. And as the room settled into silence, waiting for my father to speak, I understood something with absolute clarity. This night was not ending the way it was supposed to. Not anymore. The room quieted almost instantly when my father raised his glass. It was practiced. The way he did it. Not loud enough to demand attention, just confident enough that people gave it willingly. Conversations faded. Bodies shifted. Eyes turned toward him like they always did. And just like that, the moment he had been building all night was his. Pause. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice smooth, controlled, carrying easily across the room. It means a great deal to our family to celebrate a moment like this with people who have been part of our journey. Our family. I felt that phrase settle in the air, familiar and distant at the same time, because I had heard it my entire life, and yet somehow it had never fully included me. Pause, he continued, moving through the speech the way he always did. Carefully structured. Each sentence placed exactly where it needed to be. He talked about legacy, about hard work, about values. Words that sounded solid, even when the reality behind them was more selective. People nodded, smiled, listened, because this was the version of the story they had been given. And until tonight, there had never been a reason to question it. Pause. Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward my brother. And, of course, none of this would mean anything without the next generation carrying it forward, he said. Daniel has always been, he paused, just long enough to create emphasis. Our successful child. There it was.
Clear. Public.
Final. The same line delivered with certainty in front of everyone who mattered. Pause. A few people laughed softly. Others nodded in agreement. My mother smiled, her expression warm, proud, exactly as expected. And for a second it was like nothing had changed. Like the conversation in that hallway, the truth that had just been spoken had not happened at all. Pause, but I knew better. Because I was not watching my father. I was watching my brother. And he did not react the way he would have an hour ago. He did not lean into it. Did not smile in that easy, automatic way that matched the narrative being presented. Instead, he stood still, listening,
Processing.
and for the first time, not fully aligned with the version of himself being described. Pause. My father kept going. He spoke about sacrifice, about investment, about believing in potential. Each word reinforcing the same message he had always carried. that success was something you could predict, control, build through the right choices. And that he had made those choices correctly. Pause. I felt something shift then. Not in the room. Not in the speech. But inside me. Because for years, I had stood in moments like this hearing versions of that story, knowing exactly where I fit into it. Or more accurately, where I did not. And I had stayed silent. Not because I agreed, but because I did not see a way to change it without becoming something I refused to be.
Loud.
Reactive. Emotional in a way that could be dismissed. Pause, but this was different. Because this time, I was not the one holding something that needed to be proven. The truth had already entered the room. Quietly.
Directly.
And it had gone exactly where it needed to go. Pause. My father raised his glass slightly higher, preparing to conclude. We could not be more proud, he said, looking directly at my brother, of the man you have become and the future you are building. The room responded with a soft wave of agreement. Glasses lifted. Smiles exchanged. The moment was landing exactly the way he intended. Pause, and then something changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. My brother stepped forward. One step. Small, but deliberate. My father paused, just slightly, his rhythm interrupted in a way that had not happened before.
Dad, my brother said. His voice was calm.
Controlled. But different. Not the same easy tone he had carried all evening. The room stilled again. Not completely, but enough. Because this was not part of the script. Pause. My father smiled, expecting something light. A thank you. A continuation of the moment he had created. Yes, he said. But my brother did not match that tone. He looked at him directly. Then briefly toward Olivia. And then back again. I think there are some things that matter more than what you just said, he continued. Pause. The air shifted.
Subtly.
But unmistakably. People were still holding their glasses. Still facing forward. But now they were paying attention in a different way. Not passively. Not politely. Actively. Because something had moved off script. Pause. My father's smile held, but tightened at the edges. What do you mean? He asked. Still controlled. Still composed. But now aware. My brother took a breath. Not rushed. Not hesitant. Just intentional. I mean, that success is not about what you invest in someone, he said. It is about whether they are honest with you, and whether you are willing to see things as they actually are. Pause. That landed. Not fully understood by everyone in the room, but enough to create tension. A shift in posture. A slight narrowing of focus. Because even without context, people recognize when something real is being said. Pause. My father's expression changed then. Just slightly. Not enough to break the surface, but enough to signal that control was slipping. Daniel, he said quietly, this is not the time. Actually, my brother interrupted. Not loudly. Not aggressively. Just firmly. This is exactly the time. Pause. And for the first time in a room that had always moved according to his expectations, my father did not have the next line. The structure he relied on, the certainty he carried, it hesitated. Just for a second. But that second was enough. Pause. I stood there, watching it unfold, feeling something settle deep inside me. Not satisfaction. Not victory. Something quieter. More final. Because this was not about proving anything anymore. It was about something else entirely. Pause. It was about the moment when the story that had been told for years stopped being the only version people could see. The silence that followed did not feel empty. It felt suspended. Like the entire room was waiting for something it could not yet name. My father stood there, glass still raised, his expression carefully controlled, but no longer effortless. The confidence was still there, but now it had to work harder to hold its place. Daniel, he said again, his tone lower this time, more measured. We can talk about this later. Later. That word echoed in my mind. Because that had always been the strategy.
Delay.
Redirect.
Contain.
Keep everything within a version of reality that could be managed. Pause, but my brother did not step back. He did not soften his stance or adjust his tone to match the expectation in the room. Instead, he stayed exactly where he was. No, he said quietly. I do not think later works anymore. There was no anger in his voice.
No accusation.
Just clarity. And that made it harder to dismiss. Pause. A few people shifted uncomfortably. You could feel it in the subtle movements. The way glasses were lowered slightly. The way conversations that had been waiting to resume did not. Because something real was happening now. And real does not blend into the background. Pause. My father lowered his glass slowly, placing it on the nearest table with deliberate care. A controlled movement. Reclaiming space. Reasserting presence. If there is something you want to say, he replied, then say it properly.
Properly.
As if there was a correct way to disrupt a narrative that had never allowed for disruption. Pause. My brother nodded once. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. Then he turned slightly. Not toward my father. Toward Olivia. And that was when the room truly changed. Because this was no longer a conversation about image. It was about truth. Pause. There are things I learned tonight, he said, his voice steady. Things I should have known before standing here. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was not. I saw Olivia beside him, her posture still composed, but her eyes no longer hiding anything. Not fear, not hesitation, just presence. She had made her choice. Pause. My mother stepped forward slightly, her voice softer, trying to ease the tension. Daniel, sweetheart, maybe this is not. It is, he interrupted gently. Not dismissing her. Not disrespecting her. But not allowing the moment to be redirected either. It matters now. Pause. The room held that. Not fully understanding, but recognizing the shift. Because moments like this, you do not need all the details to feel what is happening. You just know that something fundamental has moved. Pause. My father's gaze shifted then. Not to my brother.
To me.
Just for a second. And in that look, there was something I had never seen before. Not anger. Not disappointment. Something closer to realization. Not complete. Not fully formed. But enough to register. Enough to understand that whatever was happening did not exist entirely outside of me. Pause. I did not react. I did not move. Because this was not my moment to step into. This was the consequence of something I had chosen not to silence. And now it was unfolding exactly where it needed to. Pause. My brother turned back to the room. Not addressing everyone directly, but no longer contained within a private conversation. I was presented tonight as someone who has everything figured out, he said. As someone who represents success. A small pause. Then he continued. But success without honesty is just a performance. Pause. That landed harder. Not because of the words themselves, but because of where they were being said. In a room built for celebration. In a moment designed for affirmation. And now it was being reframed. Pause, Olivia spoke then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But clearly enough that those closest could hear. I should have told you sooner, she said.
No justification.
No explanation layered over it. Just the truth. And that carried more weight than anything else she could have added. Pause. My brother nodded slightly. Not in approval. Not in rejection.
Just processing.
But you told me now, he said. A simple statement. But it changed the direction of everything. Because it shifted the focus from what had been hidden to what had been revealed. Pause. My father stepped forward again, his voice firmer now, attempting to bring the moment back under control. We're not going to dissect personal matters in front of everyone, he said. This is a celebration. Celebration. The words sounded different now. Lighter. Less certain. Because the foundation it rested on had just shifted. Pause. My brother looked at him. Really looked at him. And, for the first time, there was no alignment between them. No shared understanding of how the moment should proceed. It can still be one, he said calmly. Just not for the reasons you planned. Pause. That was the line. The one that separated what had been expected from what was actually happening. And once it was crossed, there was no returning to the original script. Pause. The room did not erupt. There was no dramatic reaction. No raised voices. Just a quiet, collective awareness that something significant had occurred. People adjusted, recalibrated, took in what they had witnessed, and began to reinterpret everything around it. Pause. I felt it too. Not as an observer anymore, but as someone who had been part of the shift, even without speaking. Because for years, the narrative had been controlled by one voice, one perspective, one version of truth. And now that version was no longer the only one in the room. Pause. My father stepped back slightly, his posture still strong but no longer absolute. My mother remained beside him, her expression softer now, uncertain in a way I had never seen before. And my brother stood in a space that had just been redefined, not by what he had been given but by what he had chosen to see. Pause. I exhaled slowly, feeling something settle deep inside me. Not closure, not resolution, but something just as important. Recognition. Not from them, not fully, but from the moment itself. Because for the first time, I was not standing on the edge of their story. I was part of the truth that changed it. The room did not return to what it had been before. Not fully. Conversations resumed, but softer. More measured. People smiled, but their attention lingered just a second longer than usual, like they were recalibrating what they had just witnessed. Because once a moment like that happens, it does not disappear. It settles. It reshapes the space around it. Pause. My father did what he had always done. He adjusted. He moved forward, speaking again, redirecting the tone, re-establishing structure where it had slipped. And, to his credit, people followed. They always did. The music came back up slightly. Glasses were refilled. Small conversations restarted. On the surface, the event continued. Pause, but underneath, nothing was the same. I saw it in the way people looked at my brother now. Not just with admiration, but with curiosity. I saw it in the way they looked at Olivia. Not judgment, but awareness. And I saw it in the way my parents carried themselves. Still composed, still controlled, but no longer unquestioned. Pause. I stayed for a while. Not out of obligation, but because I wanted to understand what this moment had actually become. My brother and Olivia stood together, speaking quietly, no longer performing for the room. Not distant, not broken, but real in a way that had not been there before. Whatever they chose next, it would be based on truth. And that was enough. Pause. At one point, my brother approached me. Not immediately. Not in a rush. But when he did, there was no hesitation in his step. Hey, he said, stopping a few feet away. His tone was different now. Not casual. Not automatic. Just present. I nodded slightly. Hey. A brief silence settled between us. Not uncomfortable. Just new. You knew, he said. Not accusing. Not questioning. Just stating something he had already understood. I held his gaze. I knew enough to make sure you heard what mattered. I replied. Pause. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. You could have said something directly, he added. I let a small breath out before answering. That would not have been my decision to make, I said. It had to come from the right place. He considered that. Then, after a moment, he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not agreement, but recognition. Pause. Thank you, he said finally. Simple. Direct. And for a second, I did not respond. Because those two words, they landed differently than anything else he had ever said to me. Not because of what they were, but because of what they represented. He saw me, not as the background, not as the one who managed or adapted or stayed quiet, but as someone whose presence had mattered. Pause. You are welcome, I said. And that was enough. We did not need to say anything else. Not right then. Because whatever had shifted between us, it was still forming. Still settling into something that would take time to fully understand. Pause. My mother approached next. Slower. More tentative. Natalie, she said softly. I turned toward her. Her expression was different now. Not the practiced smile. Not the controlled warmth. Something else. Something closer to uncertainty. You should have told us how well you have been doing, she said. The words were careful. Almost cautious. As if she was stepping into unfamiliar territory. I held her gaze for a moment before responding. You never asked, I said. Pause. There was no edge in my voice. No accusation. Just the truth. And sometimes, the truth is more disarming when it is delivered without emotion. She blinked slightly, absorbing that, then looked away for a second before nodding. A small movement. but real. Pause. My father did not approach me. Not that night. He remained in his space, speaking to guests, maintaining control where he could. But I saw him glance at me once. Just once. And in that look there was no dismissal. No reduction. Just acknowledgement. Not complete. Not resolved. But present. And that was more than I had ever had before. Pause. I left before the night ended. Quietly. Without drawing attention. The same way I had arrived. But the difference was, I was not leaving as the same person. Not in the way they saw me. And, more importantly, not in the way I saw myself. Pause. Outside, the air was cooler. Quieter. The kind of silence that feels earned after being in a room full of noise. I stood there for a moment, letting it settle, replaying everything that had happened not as a sequence of events, but as a shift. Because that is what it was. Not a confrontation. Not a victory. A shift. Pause. For years, I had been defined by what I was not given. The investment I did not receive. The recognition that was never extended. The opportunities that were directed elsewhere. And for a long time, I thought that meant I had to prove something. To earn a place that had never been offered. Pause. But tonight, I understood something different. I did not need to be included in their version of success for mine to exist. I did not need their validation for my work to matter. And I did not need to force recognition for the truth to eventually reveal itself. Pause. Because when something is built on what is real, it does not need to be announced. It becomes visible on its own. In the moments that matter. In the spaces where it cannot be ignored. Pause. I walked toward my car slowly, the quiet stretching around me, grounding me in something steady. And for the first time, I did not feel like I was catching up to something that had been given to someone else. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, not behind, not overlooked, just aligned. Pause. And the most unexpected part was realizing that the moment that changed everything was not when I spoke. It was when I chose not to stay silent.